Hey, welcome to Ben just diving in for a single video just to give you some idea about what we're talking about with organization. We're going to be talking about the things that are on the screen one at a time, and then you will have a better idea as to what Rick is going to tell you about with organizing the assets folders. Let's start by talking about the vision of separate modules. Now, before you get confused about this project, it may look very different to what you're seeing. This is actually a future version of the project. We have used our special in-house time machine. So this won't match what you're seeing, but I'm not going to be changing the project at all during this video. I am just going to be talking in general terms about project organization and our philosophy around it before Rick will dive in the next video with a very practical and hands-on approach of actually putting some of that to the test. Now, I say to the test because we don't know for sure that this is going to work, but we think that these are some good general guidelines and ideas. So let's firstly talk about the vision of separate modules. What do I mean by that? Well, what I would hope for is that in this project, at some point, we will be able to export by right-clicking and saying export package on Camera UI, for example, and it would be self-contained. And the same with the characters containing enemies, NPC, player. Again, we may be able to export that and somebody could bring that into their RPG. Same with levels. Maybe they just bring in our story, maybe weapons, and the same with world objects. So that's the general idea, is that we decouple these modules. From a coding standpoint, we certainly want to do that using things called namespaces. In fact, I've got a namespace error at the bottom here. Again, ignore all that. You won't have it in your project, and I've just created it by deleting folders. But we're going to be using things called namespaces in our scripts that are going to force us to think about how we separate these things out. And while doing that in code, we may as well be doing that in terms of assets as well. So that's the idea, is to decouple things. When you get a lot of different things, you want to start thinking about those things being decoupled from each other so that changing one can't break others. We may also need, by the way, to have ourselves a hub and spoke model where we have something like an RPG core concept. The idea basically is that if you look at this folder structure, it should sing RPG. It shouldn't sing Unity because that's the framework coming through too strongly. You know, if we want to know that we're composed of all these things, scripts, scenes, prefabs, well, we've got a filter for that. Why repeat that structure over in the asset hierarchy? Why not have the top level hierarchy of your project sing the fact that it's an RPG? That seems to make a lot more sense to me. All right, so that's the first thing. So then what I want to talk about is how to bubble up assets in order to share. So the idea here is that if we get something at a lower level, like one of these materials, although we wouldn't have a materials folder in the new paradigm because that's the name of a filter, Rick will talk you through that later. But if we did have a material that we want to share on something else, perhaps something inside a village, this material here, and we decide actually we want to use this damaged thatch or texture is a better example, a crate texture. If we want to use that across all the world objects, we'd promote it up like that. We'd take it up a level. So the general philosophy is, as you want to share things with more and more objects, you bubble them up the hierarchy, asking yourself very carefully, am I happy for this thing to be shared this widely? And certainly never putting anything at the root. We certainly don't want anything at the root. We want at least this decoupling at the root. And then as individual areas like world objects get unmanageable, we also want to start creating some decoupling here. We need to do better than in this example because here we have ambiguity. Should something go in farm or village? It's not entirely clear. We need to create a better separation than that ultimately. Levels has good separation. It's by separate scenes, separate levels. Characters has good separation. Something is either a player or an NPC or an enemy. That's all good. And this leather is shared between those. So that's the general idea. So you bubble things up, but asking critically, would I want this leather to be able to be shared between all of these different domains? And I think in this case that's fine, but we wouldn't bring it all the way to the top because that would be being shared too widely and it will get us away from being able to have separated modules. So when would you create folders then on the other side of things? Well, it's simple. What Rick's going to be suggesting to you is that we don't worry about folders being messy like this, for example, loads of stuff in it, because we've got a filter. And at any one time, you're looking for, say, prefabs. So the answer is you make folders when there's too many of something in a given folder. So if I was to come to Camera UI and select prefabs, and here, well, there aren't that many. There aren't so many there. There are far too many prefabs at the top level, but that's okay because we have folders to manage it. So you basically create folders when there's a genuine pattern, and you want to be willing to rename those folders when you decide that your pattern is contrived. or when it's inconsistent. So imagine in my bathroom, I've got a few cupboards. One's for tooth stuff, one's for skin stuff, and one's for hair stuff, let's say. Now imagine I label another cupboard plastic items. Now that's not good from a consistency point of view, is it? Because if I have a toothbrush that's plastic, does that go in the tooth cupboard or the plastic cupboard? The problem is it's a completely different type of separation. So that basically brings us down to the fact that all of this stuff about organization is really important and it's hard. And the reason it's important is because it's about naming and cache invalidation. Again, it's been said that they're the two hardest problems in computer science. Naming things, we really want to spend time and thought on very, very careful naming. The naming of these folders in here going to need a lot of thought so that it's really clear. We want to get it as clear as it is under characters, enemies, NPC, player. We've got to work out what that is for world objects. We haven't got that right yet, even in this future version of the project. And cache invalidation is about the idea that we need to be super careful whenever we have caches or copies of things. And basically, a lot of this is trying to avoid having copies. We want to be able to share textures. We may want to share materials, although we may decide actually every single material slot should have a unique material in it. But we certainly want to be able to share textures. Not only because it saves a load of memory when we're playing the game, but also because we don't want to create duplicate work, etc. And we don't want to be copying textures around. So this whole thing that I'm talking about is about naming and cache invalidation. Basically, we need you to just think about organization and come up with your own strategies for it. But also, there are some considerations when working in a team. It's not quite so clear-cut as to how this could be organized when working in a team. Because we've got to think that in a team we have version control going on. So if we look at my version control system here, it's all very well when it's just us producing the course. So that is this what we call solo view here. It's just very linear. But what's really going on is that on other branches, Mikey and Rick are doing other things in parallel. And when people are doing things in parallel, of course, we create some ambiguity about which changes to things should be kept, particularly which changes to prefabs and scenes. They're the two things that create the biggest conflict when we try and join our work back together again. So if we are having the hierarchy constantly change depending on the level of sharing and who decides to create folders, the problem is if two of us are doing that at the same time, and we try and merge our work together, that's going to get very, very confusing. So the key really there is that Mikey will be responsible for the organization of the assets, and we will be responsible for using them. And if we don't like the way they were organized, we'll say, hey, Mikey, next time you're touching the assets, maybe you could organize them like this. And then he'll organize them, and we will use them. Okay, so that's it, really. I just wanted to give you a quick primer on my thoughts about organization and where I'm coming from with it. I just want to summarize all that for you, so I'll just bring the slide up here. So the vision is of separate modules, ultimately at the top level, and then later at second levels. We want things to be decoupled, if possible, into a handful of things at each level, 5 to 7 different things at each level. Had a bubble up to share. So the idea there is if something starts at a lower level for some reason and wants to be shared with other things, you go up in the folder structure, but you think very carefully each level you take it up. Do I really want this thing to be able to be shared amongst this many different items? Do I really want that many dependencies? But if you're happy with it, then you bubble up. You create folders when you need to. Don't be too afraid of too much in a given folder in Unity, because remember that you've got the filters tool, and at any one time you're probably looking for a material or a texture or a prefab or something like that, and you can look for those things by type. So the folder can be quite large, but when you filter by type and there are still too many, that's the time to create folders. This is all about naming and cache invalidation. Again, huge topic in computer science, huge topic in managing complexity in general. And remember, when you're working with a team, you may need to be flexible, you may need to create a slightly different system. You'll see us fumbling and working to try and come up with something that's going to work for the way that we are working on this project. And we've got the unique constraints as well that we need to be able to make things easy for you guys as students to follow. So we're not only building a team and collaborating, Rick and I are collaborating one way in that we're building the game in front of you. Mikey's collaborating on a sideline, building the asset packs. So every different team, every setup is a different, unique experience. So that brings me on to your challenge. I want you to share your organizational thoughts and strategies. I'd like to know what's worked for you and not worked for you in the past. And go ahead and just share that with us. And we'll look forward to that discussion lighting up inside our community site or in the Udemy Q&A. And I will see you in, well, actually, Rick will see you in the next video.